Hey, well, good afternoon. Welcome to the Dream Labs. Dr. Contrast Live here. Just thought I'd take a moment here and welcome everybody on board Carsonian. Good to have you on board. Of course, the shadow's in. That means we're ready to really fly. So we've got a good audience to begin with here. And just want to take a moment to bring up to speed on some things here over the last couple of weeks. We did one last go around was a stream based on just basic proportion on like level 1 thinking in terms of putting together the 1, 2, and 3 box system and how the elevations begin to work and how proportions begin to work on that system. So since that stream, I went back in and looked at the history of some of the mechanics of this process and getting proportion into phase 2. And I thought I'd just take my time and put together a series of plates to explain what the next step is in terms of putting together proportions for transportation design. And of course, the last stream we did on the basic three box system was basically on a 1-point setup. I did a series of sketches in 1-point perspective to show how that proportion worked. However, this go around, I think it'd be kind of nice to start with a basic setup and then elevation, show you how this whole 2-point perspective begins to work out, and go through some exercises, some boards that I prepared here to discuss about what proportion does and what it looks like. And near the end of the program, we'll go back and review some of those 3-box systems we dealt with in the last stream we did. So let me start here just for very quickly. This is a very rough first plate sketch here of just an elevation study here at ground zero on the ground line, and then starting up with the initial wheel itself, and then 3 in between like we did on this same program. Just going to number 1. Doing well, thanks, Dr. Conte. How are you doing? Yeah, I'm doing really well, Carsonian. Thank you very much. So again, let's start with the very fundamental elevation here. When you look at this whole elevation, this design of this sketch is really geared to set up what the overall length is, overhangs, and then overall height. Now you can adjust that as you go. Obviously, it's not going to be a really set in stone. Follow these principles, but you can once you get the basic formula down, you can even massage it and move it around a little bit to get some really good variations in theme put together for your sketches. So we started here with the initial tire wheel diameter, count 3 back, then the rear wheel. Then on top of that, we add another tire on top of that to give you a little overall height variation to kind of see where that proportion begins to set. So you've got length to height, and some overhangs, and 2 things that are very important to work with here, and they can modify themselves as they go as well. And that is, you have a ramp angle and a departure angle. They're typically there just to kind of protect yourself from any scuffing or proportional changes and going through driveways or areas that have a little bit of incline to them. So those are pretty safety precautions in terms of both the ramp and the departure angle. And I think it's really important to notice too, the windscreen angle, traditional speaking, from the center line of that front wheel, at 45 degrees, you come up through that body line, and that gives you some sort of a windscreen angle at 45 degrees. Now that can change, go a lot quicker, obviously, be a little bit slower, but nonetheless, that's a basic formula for setting up a proportion here in that elevation. And that takes care of that, as just looking at the basic overall length, the ramp angle, the departure angle, and getting the heights all set. But then down below here, I think the most critical is now moving in the 2-point perspective. How do you take that proportion and convert it into a 2-point system and show you how that all begins to operate? Well, there again, it all begins with the face of a cube, and I'll show you that in just a few moments with some of the plates I put together to kind of explain this a little further and a little more dramatically speaking in terms of how to put together the program. So when you start with that face of that cube and you come across here and you set that first circle in place, notice they're all standing up. You've got again, not to be redundant, but you've got the major axis and the minor axis. And while we're at it right here, I think overall, that minor axis always goes back to a vanishing point right in this case. And then this one, when you drive through, we'll get to that in a moment, explain it. We'll take you right back to vanishing point left. So notice, once that first wheel is planted, you take the same diameter. Now these red lines are interesting. You can use a construction piece by saying, once you set that first circle in place, corner, the intersection, and run that line through, there's your second circle. Down again the corner, run it through, third circle, and so on, and build that portion back here. So that gives you a pretty good indication of correct proportion to get the first wheel down, then 3 wheels in between, and then that last plant where that last circle in perspective falls. Notice too how it opens up here. It's very open. As it goes back, it collapses, so it kind of narrows a little bit. It gives you a little more sense of scale and perspective and depth. Now the other tricky thing is when you go across the form here, and I'll show you this in a moment here with some other sketches. That's again face of a cube. Now you finish this line here, for example, this very light line indicates the other face, the left-hand face of the cube. And you step that back 1, 2, then proportion there, the overall width roughly 2.5 inches or 2.5 cubes. So you go 1 back, 2 back, over to 3, and then cut that in half, and you get that second wheel. Notice how that last wheel here on the far side really opens up. You know how tight this is, how far that opens up. And a good rule of thumb to make sure that these sketches become more formidable and much more accurate is to do the following. Think in terms of this. When you plant that first wheel down, no matter what the perspective might be, for example, when you plant that first wheel in, as you go back in space, if you start, let's say, off, for an example here, let's say you start at 40 degrees here. As you go back, that's going to drop 10 degrees to a 30-degree circle. And as you go across, that'll remain this, it'll be the back rear wheel will be the same as the front, so it's 40 because you're almost in the same station point. Hey, it's Cincy Rachel. I'm here with a friend from home. She's watching. Hey, hi, Rachel. How are you? Good to have you on board. Thank you. This is just a preliminary piece here in terms of putting together proportion for automobile design or transportation design. And hopefully, if all goes well today, we'll start moving into some things on Thursday to show how the perspective operates. And but I think it's important to really get a good handle on what the proportions are doing. As we said, again, and not to be redundant, but in the first preparation, step 1 was to get the 3-box system down. Why are they called 3 boxes? How do they operate in one force perspective? And how do you build them up and working with the certain sketches? And as I said in the beginning of the stream, Rachel will show you how that all came up together last week. Then since that last stream, I really felt, from my point of view, really become much more incumbent and taking the time to go through a second series here in proportion phase 2 to make sure that the 2-point perspective, it's a little trickier. So we're going to take our time and go through some of the footprints, some of the stepping stones as to how this thing begins to operate here. So once again, once you go from elevation with, again, wheel down, 3 back, rear wheel with the departure angle, ramp angle, overall heights, now that can adjust. And we're not saying that we live in this envelope, but that's a good proportion to kind of set things up with. Now when you go from elevation to a 2-point perspective grid, it's a normal eye level. Look what happens again. Wheel down, 3 back, rear wheel, the far side tire, and then the far side tire. As we said before, if this starts out at 40, that drops to 30. The one behind that, behind the 40, the front wheel, this rear wheel is actually about the same overall diameter as the front, because you're almost at the same leading edge of the same viewing plane. So it goes from 40 to 40, and then the far side opens up because you're moving away from your station point. So this is 40, that increases by 10. And as you go away from it, it decreases by 10. So from 40 to 50, and then from 40 down to 30. So that's where we started here. I want to go back and let's move on here. And I want to get a really good handle on what this begins to do. So once I started with this sketch, I moved over to let's get a little more technical with this thing. I don't want to have this turn into a geometry lesson, but this puts it more in perspective in terms of how we begin to build this thing in a 2-point perspective. And again, the vehicle was, imagine yourself putting together a concept sketch, but proportionally speaking, here's how we work with it. Notice, again, first wheel down and 3 back. Then you come back in and get the wheelbase set. So there's the first wheel coming in here. 1, 2, 3 back, and the rear wheel back here. Again, far side tire opens and reduces it about the same as that. Then again, far side, look how open that backside tire is over here. So there again, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, setting up the certain perspective. And these little blocks up on top, these proportions up on top, begin to give us maybe an overall height. And as I said before, that does not have to be cardinal rule. You can kind of drop this down a little bit and begin to massage this shape. And I think as we go into this thing with proportion, it's going to be very interesting to see. This is where it gets really tough and a little bit difficult to kind of discern. This is a very structural piece to look at in terms of how the organization and how the geometry begins to build the proportions for us. But some of the fearful things we make mistakes on is that we live in this area that this is the end of the run. This is where the wheels are planted. Now, on top of that, you've got overhangs, front and rear to deal with. And we'll get into that as we go down the line here, maybe on Thursday. Show you how that begins to operate as well. I want to spend some time today making sure that we know, based on how these proportions set up, how to put together a proper proportion for vehicle design. Because if we're not careful, it'll twist all over the place. It'll begin to distort itself because we're not paying attention to some of the fundamental geometry systems that begin to govern how this stuff begins to work. And it's interesting to me too at this stage of the game how something so geometric can be governed and begin to propel form into very organic certain shapes and supple shapes. So it goes from very organic to very stealthy, and again from geometric to stealth and organic materials. So it's interesting how this whole thing sets itself up to become much more fluid, much more understandable, and much more desirable and easy to work with in terms of getting the proportions right. So here again, this is just a basic traditional. Here's my horizon line up here. This is a very important line here. That line represents where you're standing. That's your leading edge, and this is where your eyes are on the horizon line right here. As you look at this form. So as you go back in space, it reduces. As you go away from on the left-hand side, it opens up again because you're moving away from your station point. All these things are extremely, extremely difficult. Very interesting. So that's phase one. So I put that together based on the fact that let's get a little bit more geometric with this so we understand how it all begins to function. Kind of out here, great to see all of you. Yeah, neat to have you on board your game. So here again, let's go back and look at this. There's the first plate we did. So let's move along here. Here's one. Second phase, how to move it around a little bit. Notice how the geometry begins to change. And I'm showing here, for example, a whole variety of things, where that horizon line is in every case, how that begins to develop itself, and what to look for in terms of setting up the actual, just the geometry of the physical, of getting those tires set and the wheels set. And let me just say this too, for what it's worth, because I think it's extremely critical. The most important process in transportation design, and no matter what the circumstances are, is to get those wheels correct. Because if those wheels are off and they begin to twist on you and begin to collapse and drop, the entire perspective or the entire shape just begins to really destroy itself. It just does not function whatsoever. So let's put that in a real solid. That's a given. The wheels have to be set for work from the ground on up, and you're on your way. So let's look at this. For example, this upper piece. This could represent a front or a rear three-quarter. Notice where the wheels are planted again inside that face of those cubes. So critical, because oftentimes we don't have a real good handle on what that cube looks like. So we have to condition our eyes to get that cube or that face set up here nicely done. Then once you have that set, you go back. There's my initial wheel. 1, 2, 3 back rear wheel, and this little setup on top here shows me where the overall height might be. And once again, not to be redundant, but to make sure we understand that there's nothing set in stone here other than the geometry, but the actual wheelbase. And the height could change a little bit, the ramp angles can change, the windshield angle can change, all that changes, but it's all built on a very geometric setup that begin to help us put together the proper perspective here. So let's go back and look at the second one here. Again, horizon line through, vanishing points, stretch them out there as best you can. Again, same process. One wheel set 1, 3 back, rear wheel. That wheel and that wheel almost identical. This is, let's say if this is 50, that goes to 60, and that goes down to 40, opens it all up, and keeps things in correct proportion. Really critical thing to work with. Last but not least, here's a little study here. Same setup again, almost like that. Again, just moving it up to almost a typical eye line here. These are almost on eye level. This is just about right through the middle of the vehicle itself. Same process again. Plant those wheels, get those things in here, and begin to move around that, and as you go, there it is. So let's put that in a real context. That's what that looks like. That's how this geometry begins to help us govern ourselves. And I think the thing is, at this stage of the game, really interesting to look at this from this point of view. The most important aspect, other than keeping the wheels proper, is to think about this. If we keep the principles, then the principles will automatically keep us. Sometimes we have a time of just going, hey, Doug, how are you? Good to see you, man. Hope you're doing well. And go back, let me make that comment again. If we keep the principles, then the principles will keep us. And the point I'm getting at is so often we try to drift in and they say, I hope this works. I hope this will work. Maybe this will guesswork. That's really not, that's unfair to you. What's really fair to you is to understand how the geometry works. Once that geometry is set, you can be all types of fluid things that become very romantic with shapes and form, and it keeps it all in order, and you understand where you are, and you're never lost within the process. And I think that's what's really unique about putting it all together. So once again, this is a very geometric setup here, and please, God forbid, I'm not trying to give you a headache with a lot of geometry here and a lot of math, but it does help to govern us in terms of how we begin to build a very complicated thing like an automobile. And I will say this too, it also works in the product design, works in architectural, interior space, it all functions together. The circles are critical, and I think that's the idea that puts it all put together. It gives it a foundation to build on. And if the foundation is solid, you can build anything on top of that to make it secure. So let's make sure that the actual theme for today is to understand how geometry dictates success. And it's not a matter of being math-based, it's a matter of being visually based on how to put it all together. Once again, it all built on the simple geometry of a cube and how that begins to operate, and getting those major axes to stand up and those minor axes to go back to vanishing points, and to make sure that they're correct. So there's a little treatise there on getting the perspective set up, and there it is there. So there's 3 variations on theme. Again, just drawing through it and giving you the idea of what a shell is to kind of work through it. Let's move on here. Let's go back to that. There's another variation on theme here. We're looking at that same process again, where we actually open it up and get, pardon me, and get those 3 wheels in place: front wheel, 3 back, rear wheel, and just an idea of where that body form might be. And again, notice I cheated a little bit here on the upper. I just kind of took 3/4 of that wheel and dropped it up on top to drop the overall height, but the angle's a little more severe, but it gives you a little more sense of proportion. And notice this little thumbnail here really kind of cheats it a little bit. Notice I'm dropping some of the scale down. And I want to make this very solid statement too at this stage of the game. One of the nice things about getting the geometry correct is if you understand how to work with these principles, you can cheat them like mad. And I don't mean that to cheat to be deceptive, but understanding how to work with certain things to kind of make them look more romantic, more fluid into them, but put more motion into it and emotion into it. So much part of the process. Here again, there's the basic geometry and elevation. And there we are in a little thumbnail sketch. We actually dropped the height and it stretched it a little bit more and to give a little more speed form to it, which is really a lot of fun to work with, because then again, you take taking advantage of the geometry, but not really, because the geometry gives you the advantage of pure success. And I think that's important. The geometry gives us the advantage of pure success because we know how it works. And I think that's, when I work with the groups, for example, workshops or students, I'm always really intrigued by the fact that the number one issue that we all face, self included, is how does the geometry, how do we build this stuff? What makes it all function? And I think once you open that up and begin to teach individuals that there are certain fundamental truths involved in this that will not deceive you or create lies or distortions, it all becomes so much more manageable. And I think that's the reason for this stream again today, is to make sure that the geometry of truth will open us up and liberate us in terms of putting together really solid sketches to understand how the geometry, we know what the principles are, so therefore they're going to keep us. Let's go back to this. And here's a little thumbnail study, like a little 1-point perspective here. And notice I'm standing here. As I move away from it, look how that whole vanishing line just begins to drift away from us. And I think that's another thing that geometry does for us. It really opens up the fact that if I know where I am in space, where my leading edge is here, and when I move away from that, I just naturally collapse those shapes, and it begins to work beautifully. Here's a little detail here about what makes the whole thing click here. Look at this: major axis, minor axis, circle in place, and then the axle through it right back to vanishing point. And that's what's happening here in these cases. These circles, for example, these drive lines are going right back to VP, which is somewhere about right up in here. So all those things, and then once you have that set up, it begins to show you where the collapse is. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in maybe phase 3, about how collapse works and how to make that become much more believability and reality in terms of putting sketches together. So that's the second study. Then I went back into this and said, all right, what are we looking at here? Let's open this thing up a little bit and begin to look at some really quick little thumbnail sketches on how it all operates. Again, back to that same basic format. Trying to show you here is the actual geometry being set up: overall height, the rear latitude reference, and then the front latitude reference, how that begins to open that up. Notice again, very narrow, opens up, much wider, how that begins to operate and open it up. Now again, taking that same format and turning it around and using the same perspective, for example, sitting up down here, look at this: 1, 2, 3 back, wheel in place, front fender into the rear end of this thing, and it just begins to really open. Notice how that governs the perspective. All the drive lines in there. And I think that's one of the nice things about the whole process too. Once you get those things, once you get the basic geometry set up, these drive lines help us to govern the absolute geometry of the shape and keep things very accurate and putting it all correctly in perspective. So once again, this whole stream today is phase 2 on how to put together perspective proportion in 2-point perspective. And it all deals with, in this case, transportation design. But the basic, yeah, great reminder, boy, you got that right. Just really correct, Shadow. The basics are always going to be, the fundamental thinking begins to allows you to do some very superb things. So that's another little example of how that all begins to operate here as we go. Now let's move on to the next study here. Same thing again, back to that same set of process here. This is interesting too, look how this thing, almost like a little variation on theme, coming through the center line, showing where that pickup cab might be. And again, using the same geometry, notice again, with a drive line, with a vanishing point. It all comes back to that area. Let me drop this just a bit here. It all comes back to that vanishing point system up on the horizon line, and they're all going back to that same VP. This is a good example here of a 2-point perspective where that guy is rolling here and the VP out here is really stretching way to the left-hand side of the page here. So there's a little proportion here. Here's the actual block itself for the 2 circles. Then we're coming back in here and notice how that begins to really open up, and that little center line here comes out. We pick up that center line, and there's my center line cab, comes over the top, drops in again. I can use this as a basic armature for a pickup and or a small utility truck of some sort. It just works the same way. Again, from the rear 3/4, same process again, how to set that up. And I think now let's go back in here. And interesting again, how geometry. And again, I do not want this to become hopefully a real process of difficulty. Well, this is hard to kind of follow. It really is not. It's a matter of getting the proportions down and how these circles work and how cubes begin to play into it and how the proportions are set up. So there's another one. Let's go back into this guy. And this is putting into practice here. Notice, I'm going to take a moment here to show you, even though we've got the geometry set up in through here, this is the actual block form in through here. There's my wheel base setup. Front wheel, 3 back, and then into my 3rd wheel. Notice again, now this plane right here is critical. That's my facing plane. That takes me across. And notice it's one, here's my right side of the cube, left side of the cube. And again, 1 going 2 back, 3 back, and you cut that in half, and that gives me the overall width, for example, of the vehicle itself. A pretty good proportion, 2.5 cubes back. But notice what happened here. There's my facing plane. Look at the overhang I've got here. I come away from that plane about another, maybe another cube or so, another 30 inches to get that form to read around and up into the fender line and back into the rear 3/4 and into the upper. And again, notice again, that little line gives me where the pillar line is. I can roll that back into the actual body form and change the geometry of these shapes by being very much involved in the geometry of it all. Here's a little detail here, maybe getting some shadow lines down. Basic geometry, again, of getting the circle correct in a perspective study. And again, looking at the basic overall, and this again is another 2-point variation of just tipping the machine itself a little bit for giving you some idea of what those wheels begin to do and take it back in perspective and keep the geometry correct. So again, the most important thing about this plate is this, and we'll get into this in a few moments here, that this facing plane tells me where the actual framework is. That's my platform. Now I'm going to come back on it to create more overhangs and so forth. I've got to know where that surface is. I'm going to use this piece in a moment here to show you how to set up that front end. And you come back out of this thing and you roll out of that. Notice I'm back here. But the actual front of the vehicle is right here. Look at that. I mean, look at the distance in the overhang. That's another wheel forward. So we'll show you how that begins to operate here very quickly here. And it's so unique in terms of knowing, again, and this is really, the bottom line is it's really unique in terms of if you know where you are, you're always not guessing. You're always in command of the situation. So that's that, and come back to this. And let's go back to last week just for a moment, a bit of a review. For those of you who are not with us, I spent some time last week going through what is known as a 3-box study here on how to put together these elements. The 1 box, for example, is basically SUVs and crossover vehicles. So it's called a 1 box because everything's patterned into one shape again, but the portion still remains the same. It still comes down to, I've got the front wheel, 3 back, rear wheel, and I'm putting the form inside here. And now this is the 1 box. The 2-box system is basically looking at maybe like a coupe, for example, 2-door coupe, and the variation could be hatchback or whatever, but nonetheless stays the same. 2 boxes, you've got the lower body form, then you've got the upper, which forms the 2nd box. So that becomes a 2-box system here. Again, same proportions here, 1, 2, 3 back, rear wheel. And come back into this guy. Now this is a 3-box, which is now a sedan, or a 4-door rather, a little bit of a trunk carriage. Now notice what they've done here. It's interesting that you've got the body form here, and you've got the upper here, and you've added a little box form back here to give you the trunk category, and that constitutes it becoming a 3-box system. So that we spent some time on a couple of weeks ago, getting the basic proportions down in terms of 3-box, the 1, 2, and 3-box setups for vehicle design. Then we went into a couple little variants and then sketches here to show you how this is all back into 1-point perspective, like we did a couple of sessions ago. With the horizon line, the vanishing point. Notice how the collapse lines begin to work here. And again, same process. First wheel down, 3 back, 2nd wheel back. Now you drive those back into place and back to VP, and we've got the proportions set up. Coming down to a normal eye level here, same process. Notice front wheel, 3 back, rear wheel, far side wheel, again with the horizon line there. So I took that little set of scenarios. We're going to look at that and say, all right, now we're here. Now let's put it into practice here. Let's look at this from the point of view of getting that to operate. If we look at this sketch here, what we've basically done is taken this guy and showing you how to put together that 1-point setup. Here it is, for example, in the geometry of 1 point with the geometry is set, and this is putting the shape inside that. Now, if I were to take this system, that box is sitting right in here, and I'm working everything else around that to get that proportion to work. So that's, I think it's important to go back and review how we started this whole process with this 1-point system in the 3-box series to kind of move into 2-point, which we're doing today. So here's a little 1-point study. And again, took that same back in a normal eye level and what that might look like down through here. And again, the box system, or the 1 box we're looking at is right here. It's right there. And then we just work ourselves inside that shape to work with here. And then again, last little study we did here was this. Again, just some real quick thumbnail sketches on how it all comes together. Again, the same with the 3-box, the 1-box system here again, and 1-point perspective. These are 1-point perspectives because that drive line is here, my leading edge is here. I'm driving those collapse lines back to horizon line, and that's it, all 1 point. Same with this. All we've done here is shifted the wheels, for example, from here. I created an elevation first, then added a little bit of overhang that just moved the front first surface up and got that shape to work for us, and in a 1-point perspective. So that basically sets us up for the 3 series that we're dealing with here. Let's go back to the initial part here for a moment. We're going to get these sketches up again. So that review was really beneficial to get us to this stage here in the 2-point perspective. And again, as we said before, I'm going to go back through just very quickly and use this guy as an example here. That's one piece. That's what we're looking at. And again, this thing is difficult to kind of discern from how do I place the body forms in there. So now this is my facing plan here, but I'm going to come out ahead of that and begin to create the shapes that we're after. So let me take a moment here and just grab a pencil, and we'll go back and put this into some sort of practice here. So let's kind of do this. Let's kind of get this set up here. I'm going to come across, begin to create this thing in perspective, get that leading edge in place, and throw it back in perspective here. Get this up. Come back in, and here's my leading edge. Here's that first cube, which I'm going to set up here. It's going to give me that proportion here. Now I'm going to come back, and I'm going to drive a line right through this. Find my perspective center. Show you how that begins to operate. Find that point right there and drive it right back. Let me just move this down just a bit so we can see it all coming in. There you go. Now then we're going to drive this back to vanishing point. In this case, vanishing point right, vanishing point left. Now I'm going to come back in here. Now that I've got that set, and from that point and that point, drive a line through. There's my second wheel back. Point to point, there's my third wheel back. And I come back in through here, 4-wheel back. And then again here, here's my last tire right there. So there's my proportion right there. So it's that to that. Now I'm going to come across here now. Drive this through in perspective. Drive that back in perspective and create the top of that box. Drive that axle line right through there. I'll drive that line right through there. And I'm going to pick up that backside line, which is now doing this. Look how that wheel opens up relative to that wheel there. Does that make sense, gang? So far, so good. Let me get this straightened up here. So there it is. There it is. Now, as we said before, this is really critical. This is my facing plan right here. That's right, the box. That's the footprint. There it is, right there. Now, to get this, how do I get more form to it? Now, I'm going to come back in through here. I'm going to find my perspective center. Come back into this perspective center. There's my center line right there. Now, I'm going to come out in space and add this. I'm going to get some of them. I'm going to do a little circle right in through here. I'm going to put that right through. And I'm going to follow this line right here. And I'm going to drop this line right in. And there's my overhang right there. I'm going to come out of this. And again, up to wheel. Notice I use that circle. I use that circle to tell me here's my facing plane, here's my overhang. Use that circle to come out. Drop this into play. Now let's drive this line right through. Let's take that center line right through. And begin to add that spine. Look how that all of a sudden, all of that just came together very suddenly as a result of knowing how to place that where that box is, where my limit line is. I'm going to come back in through here, create a circle, and I'm going to come back out. Notice, there it is there. Here's my center line right there. Notice how that all connects. There it is, and I've moved that out that far. Does that make sense? Let me stop right there. Any comments so far, gang? Please feel free. Feel free. This is not easy to do. Let me put that in some sort of context for you here. What I've done is this. Set up a wheel. I got 1, 2, 3. This is my last tire right there. Come on, set up my center line here and pull that out. What I've done is use, there's my, that line there becomes that plane right there. So it's making sense, gang? Now I'm going to come out here and I've added that much. Now I've actually taken that circle and just drew a circle in there to give me that overhang. Now I've taken that point and brought it right up over the fender line, drop that in, pick that up, and there it is. Here's my basic gesture right there. Very simple form. See how it worked? That makes sense, gang? That point and that point are transferred in perspective, becoming that point and that point. Helping, gang? Very difficult. Again, notice, cannot stress enough how proportion and perspective is everything. Knowing the geometry helps us all to put it together. Let's go back in through here. Let's go back to the sketch. Now, if I'm going to add something else to this, I can come back and add more. I can add more crown to this by adding this. Now I brought that surface up to here. I can go back in and add lamping graphics. Look how this thing all of a sudden begins to fall into place. Look how the detail all of a sudden just falls into place. It's just fun stuff. What a great explanation. I've always struggled with this. Thanks. Oh, I think it's great. Thanks very much, Carsonian. It's always a struggle because, again, that facing plane is here. That's our perimeter. That's the perimeter right there. But to get that overhang, what I've done is this. There it is. I've dropped that in, dropped that over the top. There's my ground line right there. Now, you can do some cool stuff here with this. Go back. Now notice, I've added from there to there. What I've done is just added this and brought that right up into the form. Now I come back down again. I can come back underneath, create a ram chute here. Notice I'm going to follow the section underneath and come right back again with a circle. That circle right, let me just do this, just for fun. I don't want to confuse you here. Pardon me for just interrupting this. What I've done here, that circle is critical. There's the circle I used. I started there. Now here's the circle I used to set up the geometry. Now, from that point, there's my center line. I brought that out. That circle tangent gave me the overhang from there to there. Let's put it here. There's my circle. Here's the tangent. There's the overhang. Now I'm going to come back in underneath here and create. Let me get this out of the way here, folks. I really appreciate your patience here. Is this making sense, gang? Dr. Leonard, the contrast. Oh, don't I wish, dog? Don't I wish? But anyway, look how this all comes together. Let's open this up here. Now let's come back in. Let's pick up that fender line. Drop it in. Now let's go back and get dramatic with it. Here it is. Basic geometry. Now let's add this, drop that in, drop this back. Now I'm going to come underneath. That same thing. I'm going to use that circle again and come down below, drop this in place, and get that overhang, which comes down back to here, from that position to that position. Which now gives me this, which comes in and does it following. Now, let me stop right there. Now, look how I'm using the geometry. And again, we said it earlier in the stream. I'm using the geometry to really set up the whole proportion. I know where everything, let me rephrase that. That's a very terrible thing to say. I'm well aware of where the geometry is. So I'm using that geometry as a real help me here to get things done. So let's go back in through here. Notice center line right through here, up into the glass. All right, there it is. I mean, look at that. That's how it all, I'm seeing this again for the first time. Agree. What do you think, gang? I mean, look how that all started with, that started with simply this: 1 to 2 to 3. Wheel place. Wheel in position. Wheel in position. Going 3 back. A little bit of elevation to show you how we got that overhang. For example, this is critical. That dimension to that dimension was covered by that red circle in there. That's how I opened that up. It's really interesting how it all begins to come together here. So let's just finish this off here. If you have any questions, feel free, please. Now let's put this a little bit of sketch rendering into this thing. And that becomes part of that, which now becomes, let's get a little horizon line on this thing here. Just gotta get that through. Stop right there. What do you think, gang? There it is. I'm gonna stop here for a minute. Any commentary, gang? How we got that all put together? You know, that all came together for us here very quickly. Is this making sense, gang, or not? Am I going too quickly? Hopefully I'm explaining these things as we go here. Just kind of put a little more form in this thing. Just kind of put a little more shape into this guy. What do you think? Anybody? Very quiet out there. Hope this is helpful. It all comes down to, while I'm waiting for commentary, it all comes down to, again, I'm going to hate to be redundant, but I'm going to do it anyway. What really makes a huge difference is how it all started. This how it all started was this let's do this just for what it's worth. It all started right here with this setup. There's my box. there's my system right there. There's how I started it out. Now I came across, built this platform here. Use that platform now to come out. There's my center line right here, roughly. I came back in perspective center, drop that center line place. I use that circle. Let's kind of beef this up a little bit. Use that circle to come out from there to there. Now that is from that point to that point. That gave me the overhang. So often we do some of this stuff. YC6, amazing to learn how to play it on yeah, this is great. YC627, who are you? Where are you from? Thanks for joining us here. Hope this is making sense for you. Really a lot of fun. Let's go back in and put this in place here. So far, so good. Sharpen this up a little bit. So if I didn't learn how to play now. This is true, yeah. Dr. Contrast is not a legend. He's just struggling like mad like everybody else is here, folks. So let's go back and review this thing. Again, this all started with this whole concept of being able to understand what these guys are doing. I mean, it's just amazing how, again, it's all proportion part two. Part one was all about getting the box system down, 1, 2, and 3. Now the second one, I was slowed down a little bit. I took more time doing some things with it in terms of getting the information corrected, the perspective set up, using the system of circles to get the wheelbase corrected, and then taking it from there. And I think the thing that really has been interesting here is, let's move this down a little bit, see if I can get another sketch in here. So if we go the other way, let's do the same thing. Let's go back here and do this. If I can reach in here for just a moment here, gang. Let's come back in through here, and let's set up the other way. Let's go back in without the system here. Let's say I did this. And I come back with a drive line. I did this. I come back through again and give myself another drive line in perspective here and open that up right there. Now, visually, what I'm again seeing is this. Here's my reference line. This gives me the reference plane, and that from there to there. There's my perspective center right there. But I'm going to come back out and extend that a little bit. Let's use that again. Let's get that circle and extend that. There's from that point right there. There to there is my overhang. Everybody good? That's how it operates. Now let's come back. Let me give myself a little bit of room here. Let's come back in and do the following. Let's come back in and do a little of this. Again, center line here. Oh yeah. Hey, are they all still alive? We're probably smarter than the average kid then.
It works. Doesn't have to deal with all the costs. Like, I only.
And there it is. What do you think, gang? There's 2 studies based on, I missed a couple questions. Thanks. Office Corvette and saying how much he worked on. Yeah, it was a lot, definitely a lot of inspiration here, folks. But I think I hope this is making sense for us here. Is this helping, gang? Again, let's go back to this. It all started. These sketches are a result of knowing what that does. That's basically what I'm after today, folks. Just to really get that really interestingly put together. That proportion, that geometry, does everything to help us set up what we're looking at here in terms of putting together really good, formidable, accurate sketches. Nothing's changed here. I've just used the geometry here. As I said, I hope this explanation did not confuse anybody. That come out. So the question here is that YC6. Yeah, YC627. Where are you from? Really interested in seeing putting down perspective. Let's gotta get back doing that. Come on, yeah. I might have missed something here, so I'm just taking some of the chat lines here. Yeah, interesting. We're getting up the next one. That's exactly right. I'm back in Korea right now. Oh, absolutely terrific. Thank you so much for joining us here. That's really a privilege for me to have you on board here, and I hope this has been helpful to you. But again, I think I want to wrap it up here as best I can by making this comment, and it really is so true that we can do nothing that is exceptional or extraordinary, correct, and unique without the understanding of how geometry works. And I know that's a very difficult statement in some cases to make, but it's so true that the geometry, this stuff, to me, whenever I draw something, no matter what it is, it's automobile, product design, interior space, landscape work, I don't draw the actual object itself. I'm not interested in drawing what it is, but I'm interested in what's it made out of, what's its geometry like, what's the construction like, how am I doing certain things for you? Hey, oh, thank you, glad to be here. Hey, it's really great to be on board, Rachel. Thanks so much for joining us. Hope your friend enjoyed it as well. Thank you so much. But again, it's so critical that the principles of truth, these are truthful principles that you can't violate. And when you violate them, all of a sudden your sketches just become so difficult. Yeah, really a nice crowd to come in today. You're right, Shadow. So again, these principles are set in stone. They can't be violated. And when you begin to work with them properly, you begin to create things like, these are not great sketches. These are just what ifs in terms of putting together how the geometry works. Again, I use both of these sketches to really illustrate how critical it is in two-point perspective to get the geometry. Now, you move it around quite a bit. You can fluctuate a lot with it. But notice again how I've taken this, and let me find that one sketch here. What I've done is taken this format right here. Pardon me for search it here. I've taken this format, which is pretty traditional, overall height, 2 wheels up, and the length, and so to 3 wheels back, and the like. Notice how I've really cheated the proportions based on that. The elements are still there. There's still 3 back, but I've cheated the height. I've stretched the wheelbase. I've taken the advantage of really taking the time to really cheat the daylights out of these things, because why? The reason I do that is because, and I hope I can say this in a proper spirit, I understand the principles. So therefore, if I understand them, I can break the laws and still keep it compatible. And I think so many young people, in using this system, trying to draw automobiles, get so caught up with the geometry of trying to be perfect, it destroys the entire process. We cannot be perfect. There's no way in the world we can be perfect. But I do believe this with all my heart. We can teach ourselves to perfect the discipline that'll lead us under perfection. That's what this is, perfecting the discipline. The discipline is all set. Just perfect it. Keep working with it. Keep working with it. Keep working with it. And all of a sudden, it all comes together for you. So I really hope this has been real helpful to me. It's been really good to go back and review this. And as I said, I missed last week because I wanted to take the time to put together these plates that we showed you earlier. Most of this material here, for example, I wanted to take some time to really go through the process and make sure that that geometry is understood. And we're not guessing and pulling straws out and wondering why it doesn't work the way it does. I'm going to stop here for a moment. Anybody, any commentary at all, any questions or concerns? I really appreciate the feedback. If you don't mind your game, just exactly how did you feel? Did this work well for you? Hopefully. While you're doing that, I'll just take a moment. And again, my sincere thanks for you joining in. And I really appreciate the fact that you stayed with me over last week. I missed it 2 days in a row, Tuesday, Thursday of last week because of some scheduling appointments and then putting together the program for today. And I think this has really been helpful. And if you'd like me to go on with this maybe on Thursday, I'll be more than happy to do so. Maybe take some more views and begin to show you how this all begins to function. And again, I can't resist the following here. The thing that's really critical to me is once that box is set, once that platform is set, notice that front face right there. I used that to find out where my center was, came down, found its intersection here, pulled that up and created a circle. I didn't guess that. I just created a circle right here and I used that circle to give me the overhang, which is down into here. Oop, I missed that there, right there. Yeah, there you go. So once again, really appreciate all of you joining me today. Great time to see everybody on board. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and it's always been a real joy to do certain things. The variety is changing, the sequences will change, what we see is changing all the time, but there's always one common truth. No matter what we draw, and the principles or the things that we draw will change. For example, everything will have a different character to it, different chemistry, but the principles still remain the same. They're consistent. The principles of two-point perspective and geometry, those things are set in stone. And once we understand that, there's no end to our creativity. There's no end to our ability to put things together because we understand how the principles work. And I'll be the first one to admit too, I've taken advantage of the principles. I flatter them all the time. I enhance them all the time. I cheat them quite a bit. I don't mean cheat in the sense that to violate the law, but to make it more for lack of a better term, more romantic, more emotional, putting your real character in your sketches. And let me close with this. I think that's another really important thing too. That perspective, once you understand the principles thereof and all the foundation work, really is a motivator to get much more in tune with your sketches and become part of the process. And then the emotion comes out. Sketches should be exciting. Sketches should be dramatic. Sketches, whether it's a little thumbnail sketch like this or a finished piece, should be absolutely awesome. And just tell your story. And I think that's what I'm going to get across with these streams, to tell your story and become part of the process of being so fundamentally sound you cannot be questioned. I said to a group recently, and I think I'll just close with this. I said to a group once, there are 3 things in life that we should really aspire to become. Number 1, accountable. Number 2, responsible. If those 2 come together and work in harmony, then the 3rd one is obvious. We're untouchable. Doesn't mean we're above the law. Doesn't mean we make mistakes. We will make mistakes, but we are untouchable as far as putting together a process that has foundation of truth behind it. So once again, gang, please take a moment and thank you again for joining me. Really a lot of fun. It was just a good session. A lot of geometry involved in it, but it got the process together and began to motivate you to kind of get out there and do some really neat sketches based on the fundamentals of truth. Platform of truth. And last but not least, please take a moment and visit my website at drcontrast.com. There's a lot of neat drawing programs there. There's a 9-lesson plan, very affordable. If it helps you in any way, shape, or form, please do so. And also would appreciate too, let's send the word out that I'm live on Tuesday, Thursdays. I'd love to grow my audience, let them know that I'm available to work with. And again, if you have any comments that you'd like to have me work on, please visit my, drop me a note on my at my email at jim@drcontrast.com about things you want me to work on. Be happy to do so. And hopefully be of some help to you. Again, jim@drcontrast.com. Let me know how things are going. What would you like to see done? what do you wrestle with? If I can answer the question, great. And if I can't, I'll be truthful with you and get it done for you, hopefully. But once again, drcontrast.com, neat lesson program. Stay tuned. The store is being added to. We're putting some more some t-shirt work in, some graphics and automobile design work. That'll be going on board pretty soon. And again, so excited to have you on board here today. Thank you so much. And we'll see you on Thursday, hopefully at 2 o'clock, if all goes well. And we'll put these pieces together, maybe add another little dimension here. And last announcement too, really cool. The last 2 weeks, the last week I was spending some time as well as appointment and getting this today's stream ready. I got our digital setup ready to go, so my Wacom tablet's ready to fire up. So hopefully we'll be in good shape to put that into action here in the weeks to come for some program work on Twitch. So thanks again, gang. All the very best here. And I'll always close with this because I think it's the most important thing we talked about all session long. And it's simply this: never forget to remember to dare be great, because you are. Thanks very much, gang. All the very best to you. And thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in. Take care of yourself, and we'll hope to see you Thursday at 2. Thank you.